What's up everyone, it's Dan from NV Auto here, and today we're going to show you underneath the hood of a Subaru, show you some components and what they're all called. So we're going to start off with the air induction system, and here you have the cold air duct, which allows the cold air from the outside of the car into the air box. The air box here houses the air filter, which cleans the air from the outside before it enters into the engine to get burned. And here we have a mass airflow sensor, or a MAF, and that measures the volume and the temperature of the air from the outside into the car, so the ECU knows how to burn it. Once the ECU sees the volume and the temperature of the air, it changes so the car runs better, and it tells it to inject more or less fuel. Here we have a post-MAF hose, and that allows the air from the air box to travel into the turbo inlet. Turbo inlet here allows the air to flow from the outer box into the turbo. The turbo then forces the air into the intercooler, which cools the air via the duct on the hood and allows the cool air to enter into the intake manifold. So now we'll get into talking about the components for the turbo and what controls the turbo, and we're not going to talk too much about how the turbo functions, that's another video, but we'll talk about all the components that is involved in the turbo here. So we have a boost controller over here. This one on this car is a factory boost controller, and that controls the wastegate of the turbo. The wastegate here is connected to the back of the turbo here, and that opens and closes to allow air to escape the turbo passages, and that's what controls the turbo. Here we have the downpipe, which is bolted onto the turbo. The hot side of the turbo, which is covered by this turbo blanket, and the cold side of the turbo. The intercooler, which after the air from the turbo gets forced in, cools down and goes into the intake manifold. Here we have a blow-off valve, and that allows the air to bypass the intercooler and back into the turbo inlet. And now we'll talk about the coolant system. Here we have the coolant swirl pot, the upper rad cap. This hose here goes to the coolant reservoir on this side, which is mounted to the radiator. This hose here goes to the top port of the radiator, which is covered underneath this air duct. The last upper hose goes directly into the turbo to cool down the turbo. And here you have the feed for the coolant swirl pot, and that comes underneath the intake manifold from the side of the water pump. And here we have the upper rad hose, which is attached to the engine, and on the other side attaches to the radiator. The lower rad cap and radiator fans. You have two radiator fans on a car that's equipped with air conditioning, and the coolant reservoir.
Rolling.
Here we have the battery, positive side of the battery with a red cap on it, the negative side which does not have a cap on it, battery tie downs which holds the battery in place, battery tray. Here you have the fuse box. Lifting up the cover, you can check all the fuses and the relays. In the fuse box, we have a couple of spare fuses. You got a 30 amp, 10 amp, 15 amp, 20 amp, and the fuse holder. Here you have a quick description of what the fuses and the relays are for. You have a more detailed list of things on the owner's manual. Next we have the alternator. The alternator plug the positive cable from the battery. And this is what charges up the battery when the car is running. Here we have the AC compressor, the AC belt, AC tensioner, and the lines that comes off of the AC compressor. This is the connector for the AC clutch. Here we have the windshield washer fluid, the cap for the washer fluid where you add your washer fluid into. Down here you have the connectors for all the washer fluid pumps, one for the front and one for the rear of the car. Here we have the brake fluid reservoir. As you can see here, you can see the fluid and the lines. And the reservoir on the side here shows you the maximum line and the minimum line. In order to fill that up, you twist the cap off, lift the cap up, and add fluid to the max line. On these vehicles, the clutch fluid reservoir is underneath the intercooler, which makes it a little hard to see here. But in order to check that, you remove the intercooler or you shine a light on the side to see the level. And now the power steering system. Here you have the power steering pump, the power steering belt, which is shared with the alternator, and that's tensioned by the alternator itself. You have the feed line for the power steering, which goes down on the side of the engine into your power steering rack. And the other line is the return from the power steering rack, and that goes to the power steering reservoir, which you lift up on the cap to add more fluid. This as well has the markings on the side to tell you the fluid level. The hose from the reservoir then gets fed into the power steering pump. And now for some of the engine components. We have the connector here for the boost controller, front O2 sensor. This engine connector here is for the crank sensor and the cam sensor of this vehicle. Here we have an idle air controller, an IAC, and that controls the amount of air going into the intake manifold when the vehicle is idling. The coolant hoses that warms up the idle air controller when the car is cold. Here we have a MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor, and that measures the vacuum in the intake manifold for the computer. Here we have the throttle body cable, and that actuates the throttle body. When you step on the gas, the cable gets pulled, and that moves the throttle body and opens to allow air from the intercooler into the intake manifold. Here we have the throttle position sensor, the TPS. That measures the opening of the throttle body and allows the ECU to know how much air to allow into the intake manifold. Evap purge solenoid. That allows the fuel fumes from the gas tank to get burnt. Here we have the cam position sensor, oil cap, which you twist off when you want to add oil. Oil dipstick to check your oil levels. Thanks for watching our Subi Engine Bay for Beginner video. If you'd like to know any more details about these components or the names or location, comment below.